Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett, and coming up we've got the latest on stories developing across the globe. We'll start with the headlines. A virtual summit between US President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping may happen on Monday, according to reports. It's thought President Xi is likely to invite Joe Biden to attend the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko threatens to cut off gas to Europe in retaliation for any new sanctions imposed over the migrant crisis at the border with Poland. As 2 weeks of crunch climate negotiations approach their conclusion, a draft final statement of the COP26 summit calls for nations to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. China's capital Beijing cancels several events as a COVID-19 cluster hits a 17-month record. Beijing's detected 45 cases in the latest wave. That's the most since June 2020. Ethiopia asks Tigrayan rebels to stop their attacks and leave captured areas as a condition for possible talks. This after days of frantic diplomatic efforts by international envoys to head off another surge in fighting. And five-time world champions Brazil become the first team from South America to qualify for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Brazil beat Colombia 1-0 to book their ticket with 6 games remaining. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to hold a much-awaited virtual meeting on Monday. If it happens, it'll come amid tension over several issues, from Taiwan to human rights to trade and the South China Sea. Speculation over the meeting started when US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this week that the two presidents, who haven't met since Biden took office, would hold virtual talks soon. China's foreign ministry says the two countries are in contact over the specific arrangement for the leaders' summit. They've talked over the phone twice since Biden moved into the White House. Their last conversation was on September the 9th. That focused on economic issues, climate change and COVID-19. Relations between the world's two largest economies have been in difficulties, though, in recent weeks, specifically over Taiwan. China has significantly increased military activities near the self-ruled island nation. In October, it sent a record number of planes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. The US, in turn, has pledged military support to Taiwan, saying it will make sure it has the means to defend itself. Joe Biden will address the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference Leaders Summit on Friday. President Xi warned the meeting this week of a possible return to Cold War-era tensions if countries in the Indo-Pacific don't cooperate with each other. US media report that President Xi is expected to invite Biden to attend the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. Next to the migrant crisis at the Poland-Belarus border. In retaliation for any new sanctions the EU might impose over the issue, Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko has threatened to cut off gas to Europe. The Belarusian opposition has questioned the credibility of that threat.
Мы обогреваем Европу, они нам угрожают еще, что они закроют границу. А если мы перекроем природный газ туда?
Lukashenko has the backing of longtime ally Russia. President Putin spoke to German Chancellor Angela Merkel for the second time in 2 days and urged the EU to start talking to Belarus. if it wants to resolve the situation. Russia's also responded after Western members of the UN Security Council criticised Moscow over the crisis.
The way out, of course, goes through the dialogue. It's not the first time that the European Union faces this time of a crisis. One can really remember about the reasons why these people are really fleeing their countries, who was behind them, which countries destroyed their countries. We all felt this several years ago in Mediterranean, in some countries of Mediterranean, and the attitude of European Union was totally different than it is right now. That's why it's clear double standards.
Belarus state-run airlines has banned Syrians, Iraqis and Yemenis from incoming flights from Turkey. In a statement, the airline says the decision was taken on Ankara's request. Western countries, France, the US and Britain have strongly condemned Belarus's actions.
We, the current European Union members of the Security Council, Estonia, France and Ireland, joined today by the Security Council members Norway, the United Kingdom and the United States, and the incoming Security Council member Albania, condemn the orchestrated instrumentalization of human beings whose lives and well-being have been put in danger for political purposes by Belarus, with the objective of destabilizing neighboring countries and the European Union's external border and diverting attention away from its own increasing human rights violation.
As migrant numbers continue to grow at the Polish border, Ukraine says it will deploy thousands of border guards and security to its border. It shares borders with both Belarus and Poland. Meanwhile, Poland's guards at the Belarus-Poland border have been trying to push migrants back. As governments quarrel, thousands of men and women and children as well remain trapped at the border, enduring freezing temperatures in makeshift camps. Poland has reported at least 7 migrants so far. For the latest from Moscow, let's go across to Julia Chapman, who is joining us live now. And Julia, European leaders have been urging Vladimir Putin to use his influence over Minsk to de-escalate the situation. What chance is there of that happening?
Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin generally acts in what he believes to be Russia's interests first and foremost. So he has been taking a two-pronged approach to the crisis on the Belarus-Poland border. First of all, he has shown support for Minsk in a show of support militarily over the last few days. Today there were drills carried out by joint Russian-Belarusian paratroopers carrying out those exercises very near to the Polish border. And for the past 2 days, Russian long-range nuclear-capable bombers also carried out patrols over Belarusian airspace, also quite close to the Polish border. So certainly a suggestion there that if there were to be any kind of escalation of this crisis, that Russia would be backing its ally in Minsk. But at the same time, we have been hearing some criticism of that threat that Alexander Lukashenko made to cut off European gas if Belarus is slapped with any further sanctions over this crisis. In the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Vladimir Putin, said that Russia wasn't consulted before that threat was made, and indeed Russia is a reliable, dependable supplier of energy to Europe. So the Kremlin really pouring cold water on that suggestion, and indeed if President Lukashenko in Minsk were to try to cut off gas supplies from Russia to Europe, it's pretty clear what the view would be from here in Russia. Indeed, there is certainly a lot of influence that Russia has over Minsk, and European leaders in Poland have accused Russia of in fact masterminding this crisis. That's been denied adamantly by the Kremlin, of course, which is really watching from a distance for the most part to see how the situation plays out.
And Julia, meanwhile, the US is warning of a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. What is Moscow saying about that today?
Well, the Kremlin has said that it has a right to station its troops anywhere it sees fit. All of this stems from concerns that there is a fresh military buildup in Russia near the Ukrainian border. Of course, earlier this year, there was a very substantial buildup near Ukraine. Around 100,000 troops from Russia and much equipment as well was stationed near that border around the time that a number of military exercises were being held. And at the time in Kiev, there were some serious alarm bells being raised. Now, Russia did say that it had withdrawn some of those troops, although just last week Ukraine said there are still some 90,000 in the area. But indeed, it seems to be the US that is expressing more concern this time around. And some of the insight and analysis from defense intelligence firm Janes suggests that this is a more covert operation going on this time, that troops are being moved at night and with elite units being used, whereas earlier in the year it was pretty obvious that the Russians were moving troops around, making it more of a statement that it wanted to be publicly seen to be defending that border. What's going on right now is much less clear, but certainly the US has vowed to stand behind its ally Ukraine in the face of any Russian aggression.
Okay, Julia, thank you. That's Julia Chapman reporting from Moscow. Next to UK politics and, well, which controversy should we start with? There are several. The government has promised MPs a vote next week to reverse its plans to form a new ethics body. But it's far from clear how exactly the standards procedures to police lawmaker behaviour will end up being reformed. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is under pressure from within and without his governing Conservative Party.
Is it too late for partisan?
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's ruling Conservative Party is facing a slew of sleaze allegations. These are centred on some of its lawmakers with lucrative second jobs. With a barrage of questions from the public and even some Tory MPs, Johnson was forced to deny on the global stage that Britain and its political institutions were corrupt.
I want to say one thing which I hope is not taken in any chauvinistic spirit, but I genuinely believe that the UK is not remotely a corrupt country, nor do I believe that our institutions are corrupt. And I think it's very, very important to say that.
The scandal erupted last week when Johnson tried but failed to overhaul UK's watchdog system. This after his own MP, Owen Paterson, faced suspension over lobbying ministers for two firms that had him on their payroll. Controversy around Paterson opened up a can of worms. Numerous other MPs also had high-paying second jobs. In the spotlight is lawyer and former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox, who has been accused of using his parliamentary office for outside legal work. He allegedly earned $8 million in outside work during his time as MP. Cox, however, remains defiant. Health Secretary Sajid Javid, Mark Posey, and former Conservative Defence Minister Philip Dunn could also be under the lens. It's not just the Conservatives. Labour leader Keir Starmer, a former chief prosecutor, also allegedly earned tens of thousands of pounds from legal work in recent years. The revelations have stoked intense public anger and prompted a string of resignations, starting with Owen Paterson. Cox and others in the firing line may follow suit. Parliamentary watchdogs are likely to probe Cox's case. Amid a massive political controversy, calls are growing for a more wholesale reform of standard rules. The Labour Party wants paid directorships and consultancy roles to be outlawed. Johnson does not favour an outright ban on all second jobs. He himself was a well-paid columnist for the Daily Telegraph. But Johnson said he's eager to see expected proposals from House of Commons Speaker, who is the current holder of the politically impartial post overseeing the chamber. It has been a week of damning headlines that have shown the Johnson government in a dismal light. The British Prime Minister himself is facing questions about who paid for his recent holidays to the Caribbean and Spain, and also the grand makeover of his Downing Street flat. Results of several probes are expected soon. Last week saw Boris Johnson's ratings slump. His personal ratings for trustworthiness and competence are at record lows. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Moving on to Ethiopia, where Abiy Ahmed's government has been locked in a year-long war with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF. Ethiopia has now outlined conditions for possible talks with rebels from the country's war-hit Tigray region. The move follows days of diplomatic efforts by international envoys to head off a further surge in the fighting. According to Foreign Ministry spokesman Dina Mufti, one of the conditions for possible talks would be for the TPLF to withdraw from the Amhara and Afar regions. The TPLF has rejected the government's demand, saying the efforts failed to address their concerns and describing it as an absolute non-starter. The paramilitary group is demanding an end to what the UN describes as a de facto humanitarian blockade on Tigray. Hundreds of thousands of people are believed to be living in famine-like conditions. No aid has gone there by road since October the 18th. Last week, the government imposed a nationwide state of emergency. In a fresh wave of mass arrests, some 22 UN staffers were detained. This has further hobbled the aid response. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to Kenya, Nigeria and Senegal next week. Blinken will meet with Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta to discuss topics including regional security issues such as Ethiopia, Somalia and Sudan.
And so we are hopeful that given the important work that President Obasanjo is engaged in, the efforts that we're making and others who are engaged, that there is still a window to pull back and to move this to a better place. There is an opportunity, I hope, for everyone to pull back, to sit down, to get a halt to what's happening on the ground, and ultimately to produce a ceasefire, to have access for humanitarian assistance, and over time to negotiate a more durable political resolution.
The Ethiopian military began hitting the Tigray capital with airstrikes on October the 18th. Several foreign missions, including the US Embassy and the European Union, have decided to withdraw non-essential staff from Ethiopia. The war in Africa's second most populous country has killed thousands of people and displaced millions. Israel has approved COVID-19 vaccines for children from the age of 5. The country's 9.4 million population is relatively young, with around 1.2 million children in the age bracket of 5 to 11 years. Our correspondent Jodie Cohen reports.
Israeli children will be eligible to be vaccinated against the coronavirus with child-sized doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccine. Meanwhile, a new Israeli MRI study has found that heart damage from COVID-19 vaccination is rare and mild. And experts predict fewer side effects following child vaccination than in teenagers due to the smaller vaccine dose that will be used. The rulings came following a Pfizer study of over 2,000 kids, which found the shot was almost 91% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID-19. The FDA also reviewed the vaccines in over 3,000 children and concluded they are safe. Despite the fact that fewer side effects are expected in children, some experts have predicted vaccine hesitancy among families. I've been speaking to some parents and grandparents at a local park where there is also a main vaccination centre to find out what their concerns are.
Maybe I will do it for my 10 years old boy, but for my little girl, I didn't want to do it yet. You know, currently the coronavirus in Israel is not very high, so maybe we are staying this way, it will be okay.
Experts have also cited the potential for a coronavirus gap, with wealthier families known to be more accepting of preventative healthcare measures than poorer families. However, many parents are keen to vaccinate their kids to protect them against the Delta variant and help keep them in routine, in school and out of quarantine.
On one hand, I feel that we need to, we must, because if we want to stop this epidemic, we must do something about it. I must say that I'm a little scared because they're still little kids. My teenagers were vaccinated from 12 to 15. They're fine.
New infections in Israel have gone down from thousands of daily cases a few months ago to less than 500 daily cases this week. This is Jodie Cohn for WION World is One.
Our Jodie Cohen reporting there, and that's all we have time for on today's WION Live broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned to WION for more global news and updates. World is One.
This is right, Arab.